So, this is the famous nanosuit we keep hearing about.
Man, I gotta get me one of those.
Yeah, like Uncle Sam's gonna spend millions to protect your scrawny ass, Johnson.
Hell, you won't be mouthing off when I've got my super suit. I'll go ninja on your ass.
Now that I'd like to see.
Usually, when I cover a game, I already have in mind what kind of video it'll turn out. This game will be a thinking bout, or a specific section of this game will be a passing thoughts. I was up in the air with Crysis. I knew I wanted to talk about its stealth-gameplay, because I hadn't really heard much about the game itself, but more about its reputation and the legacy it left behind, which ain't much these days. Crysis means different things to different people. Ask someone who grew up in the early 2000s, and they'll tell you it's the benchmark everyone used to see how good the rig was at the time. Can it run Crysis was our can he beat Goku. It's the game that popularized a PC Master Race meme that still affects certain people's brains to this day. For me, it's a cautionary tale about not falling for console wars bullshit. Every time you see a slap fight on Twitter over how this platform's games look better than that platform's games, just remember that the AAA side of the industry is falling apart, and eventually, everything ends up in Fortnite. In my Bulletstorm video, I said that Doom 2016 wasn't the first game to buck the trend of 7th gen mill shooters, but I didn't elaborate. In my head, I had Crysis in mind, but I was only half right. Crysis is a 2007 sandbox FPS developed by Crytek and published by EA. You play as Nomad, a special forces operative sent to North Korea in search of a missing scientist and his research. Crysis is part of a trend in video games and movies inspired by the Future Soldier project, a thought experiment that the US and its allies conducted in trying to maximize the potential of their infantry units by providing equipment that augmented their physical capabilities. Look it up online, and you'll find images of what looked like concept art for Advanced Warfare or Halo. Because video games aren't tied to trivial matters like reality or the laws of physics, they went ham on making supersuits based on that premise. Hell, another byproduct of that era is Vanquish.
This the toy you've been working on?
I'm not going to get into the plot for this video. Instead, I'll point you to Noah Gervais and his retrospective on the series. He's mostly got it down, but be patient with him when he chimps out over the PC Master Race meme.
Crysis loomed largest of all, a tidal wave of graphical progress that left most folks' poor machines stranded way up on the beach. Ergo, well, can it run Crysis? Asked with a trolling smile full of taunting malice. Of course it can't, you pleb. I couldn't actually play Crysis until 2011.
I told you, it gave a lot of people brainworms. My focus on this video is how viable stealth gameplay is in Crysis. Even though I played through the entire campaign, and all of Warhead as well, I'm only focused on the events of the game up until you confront the general of the KPA. If you've already played the game, or know enough about Crysis, then you know the big twist.
Wait for it.
My only comment on the back half of Crysis is that it sucks how the game started feeling off open-ended and slow burning, and ended feeling like the third act of a Halo or a Half-Life title, and not a very good one at that.
Dr. Rosenthal, report to the bridge. Dr. Rosenthal to the bridge immediately.
You shouldn't keep the Admiral waiting, Doctor. I can finish up here.
Okay. Nomad, meet me up at the bridge as soon as you're ready.
Pretty girl. Not many of those in my field. If I were 10 years younger, I'd...
The final boss is especially disappointing in how it takes place on a flat, barren aircraft carrier, where you hide behind a wall of ammo crates while you fire missiles at the boss's weak points. It's literally a cover shooter set piece. Anyways, stealth in Crysis. How is it? There's no one thing I can point to and say, that's what holds Crysis back for me as being a full-on stealth game. It's a bunch of small things that build up to that conclusion. Activating suit powers consumes a meter too fast to do anything big or bold. Enemies are normal or overly sensitive and practically psychic once you're spotted. Level design is more focused on selling you on the idea that you're in a real area and not a space that encourages stealth gameplay by letting you test the limits of enemy perception. The lack of any real takedown action, besides punching a guard or choking them and tossing them aside, and the lack of certainty in knowing you can do so undetected. Stealth gameplay is a formula with the player, the enemies, and the environments serving as components. Let's break down each of those elements. Nomad's nanosuit. Ooh, try saying that 3 times fast. Anyways, the nanosuit redirects power to 4 different settings: armor, strength, speed, and cloak. At any point in the game, you can switch between any of these settings, and the suit will provide different enhancements to your actions. Doing so will cause the suit's UI to inform you with its signature voice, and you can choose which voice you want to hear. You have 2 bars on your HUD, your health and your suit power. Using any of your suit abilities will drain your power meter, and you'll have to wait until it refills to make use of it again. Max armor allows you to passively shrug off enemy gunfire. Max strength allows you to one-hit kill enemies with your fists and jump higher than normal. Max speed passively increases your base movement and lets you sprint as fast as that one flash shitpost game that occasionally makes rounds on Twitter. Cloak turns you invisible and masks your footsteps so that you can sneak behind enemies. If you kill an enemy while cloaked, you'll use up all the power in the meter and the suit will default back to max armor. Growing up, I remember hearing about Crysis and thinking it was cool that you could have all those powers at the press of a button. Even the game's attract screen convinces you into thinking you'll be doing the most badass shit in-game. But then I played Crysis and learned real quick that it really wasn't that impressive. I was trying to find a good way to describe the experience, and the best I could come up with is if you took the Mjolnir armor from Halo and deconstructed it. Like, instead of just being a walking powerhouse that, by default, could soak up enemy bullets, jump really high, and KO enemies with a single bop, you had to manually shift into those modes for every encounter. And that wouldn't be so bad in practice if the power meter wasn't so piddly. As a point of contrast, if you play Vanquish for the first time and don't know about the dash boost exploit, you could burn out your energy meter if you boosted all over the arena and triggered reflex mode without giving the suit time to recover. The Crysis nanosuit has worse energy consumption than the AR suit. What this translates to in practice is that you can't ever really sprint that far ahead, or stay cloaked for too long before your power runs out. And that power is shared among your other suit functions, so even if you decloak into max armor, you don't have any power to begin with to soak up any damage, so you're basically just tanking the bullets with your bare face. You can't even mix and match suit powers in a creative way. Like, say you want to sprint with max speed to get a running start, and then jump with max strength so that you could launch yourself across a great distance. That's just not happening. One of the features that stood out to me when Crysis was new was the ability to customize your guns on the fly, something practically every shooter lets you do nowadays. I could have sworn more games use this kind of screen, but the only one that popped up when I searched for it was Battlefield 2042. Thing is, you can only customize your guns based on the guns you picked up on the field. For example, you can only swap out the optics of your preferred assault rifle if you picked up a gun that had that attachment. The important picks for me are slapping on laser pointers for every gun I use, as it makes it easier to hipfire, and having 2 different scopes based on the distances I plan to shoot. Something else to consider with assault rifles is that you can add a device to fire sleep darts that will temporarily knock out enemies. You have to toggle the firing mode of your rifle to use this device. You can also pick up a variety of grenades and swap out which grenade type you want to throw. And just like everything with Crysis, your first impression with gun customization will make it seem like the coolest feature ever. But if you're playing stealthy, you won't ever feel the need to detach your silencer during a gunfight. And you'll find that the dart launcher has a long cooldown between shots that don't make it viable for groups of enemies, because you'll be fumbling with your equipment to toggle to the right firing mode. This is also why I barely use rifle-mounted grenades. But player actions are only part of the formula with stealth gameplay. Enemy behavior is also a major factor. The only way you can tell if an area is aware of your presence is by the danger meter on the left of your minimap. Fill it all the way up to red, and everyone in the area will be gunning after you. Enemies are scripted to start unaware of you, but they'll react to any sound you make or catch a glimpse of you. Cloaking can mask your footsteps, but it's almost a guarantee that the enemy will spot you if you're visible, even if you're right behind them and don't make a sound. This is especially important for enemies on mounted gun emplacements. They seem to have perfect situational awareness from every direction, so you won't find any blind spots in their view. Even if you manage to sneak into an enemy outpost and discreetly take out a lone guard, there's still a chance that one of his buddies gets suspicious and fires up a flare to call in backup. You can use your binoculars to tag enemies, and they'll appear on your minimap. I'm not sure if this is the first game to do that, but I think I like it the most here as the markers don't clutter your screen. The way the campaign starts, it makes you think that stealth will be a pillar of gameplay, but that's not the case at all. The first enemy you'll come across is high up on a rock all by himself. You could try to jump up to him with max strength, but he'll hear the noises you made and shoot at you. Instead, pop him with a headshot or wait for him to come down to your level to deal with him. Early chapters funnel you into vistas that are meant to take your breath away back in 2007. The very first outpost you come across has 3 guards patrolling it and a boat crew moving along the coast. This is where I spent a good deal of time understanding what made the enemy AI tick. If I shot this guard near a radar jammer, it would spook the guard on the dock and he'd fire a backup flare. So I'd sneak up with cloak and punch out the lone guard with max strength, but that would also spook the guard on the dock. But if I sneak up with cloak, grab the guard, and throw him into the foliage, I'd avoid setting off that guard on the dock, but he'd still be moving towards where they last saw their buddy alive. There's one enemy base in particular I'd like to note in the 3rd chapter. It's got 2 entrances, a front entrance that can only be accessed via rope bridge that's flanked by machine gunner nests and a sniper perch overlooking it, and a back entrance that requires you to follow a winding path where you encounter a convoy, a weapons depot, and an attack chopper. Even if you clear out all the snipers and machine gunners, even if you thin out the patrols moving through the base at ground level, you still have to enter the bunker containing the intel that you need to progress. But there's a chance that this bunker is full of guards that you have to deal with. And there's no alternate way in, despite what the textures inside the bunker imply. I'm picking apart symptoms here and there, but the real issue here is that Crysis was not meant to be a stealth game primarily. It's a sandbox game with stealth elements. If you watch my video on Left Alive and listen to me awkwardly describe how the actions you perform in games are like the verbs you use in a sentence, Crysis has the verbs you would need for a stealth game, but you can't form a proper sentence with those verbs. You can sneak, you can cloak, you can silence your guns, you can shoot sleep darts, you can carry enemies, you can tag enemies, you can gauge the danger level of a given area. You can do all these things, but I still don't think you can call it a stealth game. Much of that has to do with the fact that Crysis is a sandbox game and not an immersive sim. It's not always the case, but stealth games and imsims tend to go hand in hand. They both present you with enemies that operate as closed systems that you have to bypass or disrupt in order to progress. You observe enemy patrol patterns and learn about the limits of their perception and how to exploit that. You can make predictions on how enemies will react based on your observations and recreate those conditions reliably. The space works with the player to facilitate these moments where the player can catch the enemy off guard without alerting the rest of the group. You formulate plans, set up conditions that would cause the enemy to fall victim to your plans, and execute. And even when things fall apart, when you fumble every maneuver and set every enemy on alert, you can always escape a hostile area and the enemies will reset to let you try again. Crysis sort of does this. There are outcroppings you can use to survey an enemy camp and tag all the guards before moving in. If this game were an imsim, these outcroppings would have sniper rifles or other weapon caches to give the player ideas and options on how to approach an enemy base. But Crysis is more concerned about making spaces believable to the setting than it is facilitating player engagement. That's why you'll almost always find weapon caches in enemy outposts. Not even from an imsim standpoint, but as a game, there's no collectibles or documents to find to build in the setting for all I know. There's no incentive to explore the environment besides getting to the next objective. There's no gamey bits here, everything is just a set. You can drive vehicles and even use your nanosuit to remote control the mounted guns on those vehicles, but you can't use vehicles as a disguise to move past enemy patrols. It makes sense for boats as there's no cover to hide behind while driving them, but jeeps and trucks will also give away your position. One of Crysis' distinguishing features is its emphasis on a lush jungle environment. Again, to contrast the desert theaters of its contemporaries, and how the leaves bend into form when you collide with them. Thing is, I've never been sure if the foliage provides any actual concealment, but I noticed that I'd be less likely to be spotted if I crawled through foliage than if I were out in the open. Unless it's a chopper, those guys can see through all sorts of bullshit. So, am I saying that stealth isn't viable in Crysis? No, not at all. Like I said, the verbs are there for stealth gameplay, but you can't form a proper sentence. However, you can clutch together a phrase that resembles stealth gameplay. Man, this analogy is really getting convoluted. Because moving while cloaked chews through your power meter, I figured out this rhythm where I'd move while standing when the cloak is active, and move while prone with max speed active until my power bar refilled, and repeat the process. By the way, remap the controls so that prone is easy to reach at a moment's notice, and you can do an even more cracked out maneuver, where you start out prone with max speed set, hold crouch to change your stance, then hold shift to sprint so you can move crazy fast, and then return to prone once you let go of all the buttons. The moment you see your danger bar fill up to yellow, let go of all the buttons and cloak up once you have meter to avoid spooking any enemies. In the early chapters, you'll be moving along a coastline and avoiding boat patrols. As I said before, any soldier on a mounted gun has what feels like complete 360 awareness, so guards manning the guns and patrolling boats are real nuisances. But I found out that I could stay underwater for a considerable amount of time and swim towards the next objective, coming up for air while cloaked to avoid detection. Doing this avoids any guard outposts and minimizes the risk of detection. The game does reward you for thinking laterally, but it's still not as open-ended with what you can do as, say, Dishonored or Metal Gear Solid 5. Those games have enemies doing set AI routines that give you opportunities to rush in and complete objectives without expecting you to engage in combat. In Crysis, combat is the default and everything else is an alternative. Stealth isn't a pillar of gameplay, it's a tool in your belt that you use when the opportunity calls for it. Even when things go south and the enemy knows your position, you can still use stealth to turn it around if you're smart with your suit powers. Don't go in guns blazing. Enemies have hit-scan weapons and you won't be able to outmaneuver their fire, even if you're sprinting with max speed. And your accuracy will plummet if you're running and gunning. Instead, opt for guerrilla tactics. Kill a stray guard, get to cover, activate cloak once you have power, and relocate to kill another guard while they approach your last known position. It's funny how Crysis and Vanquish were born from the same military thought experiment, because they have a few things in common besides the stuff I mentioned before. Both games use the same font for their dialogue subtitles. Both games have protags that use experimental armor working alongside Marines who job for them, and they even escort a tank outfit for a set piece. Both games have enemies that use the same technology as the protags, and both protags remark about them in the same fashion.
Moving pretty good for a knockoff.
Maximum strength.
Strickland, you copy? I think these guys have nanosuits.
Well, I'll be damned. They aren't supposed to have that technology yet.
If it's any consolation, they look like cheap knockoffs.
Pro tip with these guys, don't bother with guns because they can soak up bullets better than you can. Sneak up on them and switch to max strength, and you can kill them in 1 to 2 hits. Unfortunately, the game stops being interesting once you confront the general of the North Korean army. This is my favorite boss fight in the game because the arena gives you plenty of weapons to choose to fight the general, or you can switch to max strength and punch him to death. Thing is, he also has a nanosuit and can one-shot you with his melee attack. So you gotta shimmy in and out of the pocket to punch him while his AI figures out whether to shoot or swing the chain gun. The ragdolling at the end makes it all the more satisfying. I figured I had enough for this video, but I wanted to see if Warhead did anything else with the core gameplay. I'm surprised to say that Warhead improves how the suit consumes power. It actually feels viable to rush into combat with max speed and hipfire groups of enemies. You can even run up the side of a tank, slap on some C4, and detonate it to destroy the armor before its cannon can even track you. You can use max strength to steady your aim when sniping with long arms, which feels like a step in the right direction in terms of being more im-simmy. You can now dual-wield PDWs in lieu of pistols if you want more DACA for your silenced weapons, but your long arm slots are taken up by a shotgun and railgun combo. Warhead is the better campaign because it's a microcosm of the main story. Psycho is a much more interesting lead than Nomad. No joke, the romance between him and his battle buddy rivals the one between the boys from Inversion.
So you and Nomad an item now?
Well, let's just say I've had worse teammates, eh?
Screw you! That should have been me, and you know it.
And the level design and enemy encounters feel more confident now that Crytek had a year to build off of what they started from the main campaign. At first, I thought it was nuts how many troops were lurking about in the starting jungle area. But that's where I realized how enemy perception had been tweaked to be less bullshit, and power consumption felt more efficient while Cloak was active. It's still not perfect though, as it falls into the same pitfalls as the main story, where the aliens hijack the plot, and the back half of the game funnels into a marathon of set-piece encounters. The train level is probably one of the best that the era ever had. but it's still a train level in a 7th gen mill shooter. Warhead kind of rallies at the end, with the final area being an assault on an enemy base like old times, but then it chokes into another bad fight with a large alien and its ads. At least a super railgun is pretty cool. Should you play Crysis? Yeah, sure, it's a pretty cool shooter and still a novelty for what it is. I'm sure the only versions you can get nowadays are the remasters, which is for the best as getting this to run on a modern setup is a real hassle. That's another thing about the game. Someone smarter than me can tell you that Crytek backed the wrong pony when it came to how PC gaming would develop. If you come into the game thinking you're going to be this ultra slick super ninja, temper your expectations. Treat your suit abilities more like power-ups and less like mode shifts. If you know how to effectively play a spy in TF2, that's the kind of mentality you need when using Cloak. Not sure when I'll cover it, but rest assured that I'll be doing Crysis 2 and 3 at some point.
Well, I think it's finally over.
It is now.